Good evening. Welcome to the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts in the beautiful Berkshire Mountains of Western Massachusetts. Each spring semester, we host a lecture series called the Green Living Seminar. This annual lecture series is sponsored by the Environmental Studies Department and generous donors to MCLA. I'm especially glad to have all of our audience members here this evening. Thank you for coming. After tonight, we will have 3 more Thursday evening lectures, and I hope to see you at those as well. I also want to announce 2 other events that you might find of interest. One is being organized by one of our student groups in the course on April 6th. This is a panel to learn about heat pumps, and there's some flyers up on the front of the desk up front you can grab on your way out. Another event is our annual Vadnais lecture series, which will take place on April 10th. A Wednesday, coming up in a couple weeks here. There are also flyers on the front desk that you can take and advertise to your networks as well. Our semester topic for this lecture series is Greening New England. And each week we have been learning about the different organizations that are working to make New England more sustainable for people and for the environment. If you've missed any of the previous weeks or even previous years, you can go onto our YouTube channel called MCLA ENVI to find those recordings. Tonight's presentation is called PFAS in the Environment and the Massachusetts PFAS Task Force. And this will be given by Jeffrey Arps. Jeffrey received a BS degree in environmental engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in 1992. He worked in environmental consulting since that time, including the last 29 years at Ty & Bond in Westfield, Massachusetts. Since 2002, Jeffrey has been a Massachusetts licensed site professional, which means he's certified to work in Massachusetts on privatized waste site cleanup programs. Jeffrey's work involves the assessment and remediation of properties impacted by releases of metals, petroleum compounds, and chlorinated solvents, and more recently, PFAS, in accordance with the Massachusetts Contingency Plan. In 2021, Jeffrey was the only licensed site professional selected to serve on the Massachusetts Legislature's PFAS Interagency Task Force, which set out to identify the scope of the PFAS issue and to develop a set of recommendations for future legislation. Thank you, Jeffrey, for being here tonight to give our presentation, and please help me welcome Jeffrey to MCLA. I'm sorry. That's all right.
That wasn't supposed to be the title. That was supposed to be the title, but
That was my fault. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No biggie. No biggie. Thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here. As Dan said, I've worked in environmental consulting for a long time. I've worked on just about every kind of site you can imagine, and now we are moving into PFAS. So my slides don't have a lot of photos, so I'm going to try to linger on the ones that do, just to avoid the text heaviness. So this opening slide you can see is firefighters using AFFF, which is aqueous film forming foam. So that's the beauty of PFAS. They provide this, create kind of a blanket. So if there's a fuel fire or something like that that they're trying to control, they can spray this material on, and basically it smothers it, starves it of oxygen, the fire goes out. What they didn't know, well, what some people knew, but most of us didn't know, was how toxic these chemicals are, and when you spray them all over the place in a firefight, they work their way into the environment. So just a quick outline, we'll do a quick review on what PFAS are. We'll talk about some potential sources, some challenges when we're working on these sites and collecting environmental media samples. That's groundwater, soil, surface water, drinking water. We haven't gotten in too much into testing products, but there's a fair amount of that going on, tissue, things like that. Fate and transport of these chemicals, how they react in the environment, how they move, where they tend to accumulate. We'll get into a little bit about remediation. Spoiler alert, there's not a lot to do. But we'll talk about that a little bit. Some of the forensics that we can do on PFAS, because there are so many different compounds, there's some different things that we can look at to differentiate sources, figure out whose PFAS is who's responsible for what. And then a quick plug for the Interagency Task Force. And then if there's time, I'm happy to take questions. If you see something and want to blurt out a question, feel free. You're not going to mess up my rhythm. So terminology, we talk about PFAS in general. PFAS represent the entire body of all the PFAS chemicals. There's, I think somebody said 4,500 of these compounds around. They're not all named. They're not all used in industry, but as we talk about it, you'll see how they can vary so much. Two of the big ones are PFAS and PFOA. These are the two compounds, I guess, that have been known the longest. They've been around the longest. PFAS was made by 3M. PFOA was made by DuPont. And so, like I said, those have been studied the most. We know most about the toxicology. We know most about how they behave in the environment. So here's your stick and ball figure for PFOA and PFAS. The way these things are made, they have a hydrophobic tail and a hydrophilic head. So if you think about, like a duck trying to eat off the bottom of the lake, you've got the head's in the water, the tail's out. That's kind of how these things work. So as they spread out, they create a blanket, and and in the environment, they tend to accumulate at the water surface. So if you have a pond that's had firefighting runoff go into it, these chemicals will basically, the head will be in the water, the tail will be out. And so the magic of PFAS is this carbon-fluorine bond. This bond is very strong. Fluorine is highly electronegative, and it creates a very strong polar bond that makes these compounds very stable, very difficult to break that bond. And that's what gives it these properties. The surfactant property reduces surface tension, so it spreads out, is lipophobic and hydrophobic, so it sheds water. So we get into some of the applications, you'll see how that works. It's highly stable, it doesn't break down, so if you spray it in the middle of a chemical fire, it's going to put things out. It's not just going to break down because of the heat. And probably the worst kicker of it all, you've heard these things called forever chemicals. They resist biodegradation. Sorry, let me get a sip. So Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection has established standards for these 6 compounds. We call these the PFAS 6. You have your PFOA and PFAS, the 2 most common ones. You have PFNA, PFHXS, PFHPA, and PFDA. So when we look at drinking water, we sum these 6 compounds together, and the standard is 20 parts per trillion. You may have heard, parts per million, parts per billion. This stuff is parts per trillion. So a little goes a long way, as you can imagine. So the drinking water standard is the sum of these 6 compounds, 20 parts per trillion, PPT. The other soil standards and water standards are more, they have different standards per compound. The sum is only applied to the drinking water. From a history perspective, this is just a table of, this stuff was invented in the 1930s with Teflon. PTFE was Teflon. Started coming out with nonstick pans in the 1940s. Stain and water resistant products, think your Scotchgard, Gore-Tex, things like that. Anything that sheds water like that. A lot of the way we get this stuff in our bodies now is food wrappers. So you've heard pizza boxes, probably microwave popcorn bags, your McDonald's wrapper. Why isn't the paper saturated? Because it's got a liner on it that doesn't let the grease soak through. In 2000, they did start to phase these things out once they realized how bad they were. It took a long time. I got a plug at the end for a movie called, it was a movie called Dark Waters, which was kind of a drama version of The Devil We Know. It was a documentary about the DuPont facility in Parkersburg, West Virginia. If you're interested in it at all, I recommend you watch the movie. You can find it on YouTube or Netflix, any of the streaming services. I actually bought the DVD. It's a little disc you guys probably never heard of. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it there. So some of the names that you've heard of, or you may have heard of. I don't know, you guys are so young, maybe you haven't. But Scotchgard was a big treatment on furniture, carpets, things like that. Simonized wax, even ski wax has PFAS in it. I think they're finding that some of the runoff and the ski runs have PFAS in it. And that's the AFFF container. So that's what your fire department has this, and they pour this in their truck, and they have these nozzles that mix the water with it, and so that's how it's applied. Mass DEP has a number of fact sheets, so they just have different things, things for LSPs like us, people on the technical side, but they also have a lot of things for consumers as well. If you've tested your water for PFAS and you're looking at the lab report, like, I have no idea what I'm reading, they have a fact sheet for that. This particular fact sheet, they talk about, taking samples and analyzing, and some of the sources. So we talked about firefighting foam, water and oil resistance, mist suppression. So in electroplating, chrome baths, they have these big tubs full of this water with chromic acid in them, and that is actually a volatile compound. So you have to keep adding more and more chromic acid to your tank because it's all volatilizing. So they came up with this material, film-forming foam, that they can apply to the plating bath, and that helps keep the stuff in the solution and keeps it from evaporating. But that also puts it into their wastewater. Some things down below, we talked about most of those. Yeah, I think we covered that. So thinking about some real-world sources, facilities that use this stuff, one of the things on that is a lot of products that have PFAS in them aren't labeled as such. You don't see a big label that says, this contains PFAS. They don't put it on the safety data sheets. They count it under what they call, proprietary. This proprietary formula, 99% proprietary formula. So they don't tell you what's in it. So a lot of companies that have been using this stuff don't even know they've been using this stuff. So it's in their wastewater. If they've had spills on their property, they have PFAS on the property, it's in the soil. It percolates through the soil into the groundwater, ends up in the river, ends up in your private well, things like that. Landfills are a giant source. Landfill leachate, that's the kind of the water that bubbles through the landfill. Most landfills have liners, a lot of the old ones don't. So all that stuff just ends up right in the groundwater, goes right into the adjacent river. Facilities that do have an underdrain collection, so they capture all this water that goes through, percolates through the trash, picks up all the PFAS and the other contaminants that are in the landfill waste mass, and they collect that water and they send it to the wastewater treatment plant. Actually, I've got a good slide on that, so we'll hold off on that. DoD sites are big, primarily Air Force bases because they have the bulk storage of fuel, airports. Firefighting training sites in Massachusetts, there are several, I think there's 4 or 5, and those are some of the biggest sites out there. They've been spraying AFFF all over the place for a long time. This stuff sticks around, you spray it on the concrete every time it rains, a little bit more goes off, a little bit more goes off. Plane crashes, they'll usually go out and they'll spray just so the thing doesn't burst into flames, or if it is on fire, they'll put the foam on to put it out. The metal coating and plating facilities, which we just talked about. So this is kind of a cool diagram. It touches on basically everything. So let's see, if I stand here. So this would be an example of your company that's using PFAS. They're emitting it out of their stacks. They're discharging it from the wastewater. If they're spilling it, it's running off into the river. Come around here. You got a farmer's field here. So you have wastewater treatment plants. They generate sludge. So it's basically the solids that they can't do anything with. And it's high in nutrients. So let's put it on the fields. Yeah, let's put it on the fields. So they put it on the fields, not knowing that it has PFAS in it. Every time it rains, a little bit more goes down in the ground, percolates into the groundwater. There was a farm in Maine that had undergone this for a long time. They had found that it was in the soil in his fields. He'd been feeding his cows had it, the milk had it. Essentially a family farm that had run for generations was essentially worthless. And that's happening all over the country. What else? So, here's your airport with your fire and your AFFF, the runoff going into the stream. You got your landfill, you got your leachate, here's these poor folks with a private well. They're taking up the groundwater to drink, and it's got PFAS in it. You can't smell it. You can't see it. You'll have no idea it's there. If it foams oddly, that's an indication you got a lot of PFAS in your water. There's your your water treatment plant. So they're pulling this water out. Unless they know there's PFAS in it, they're not treating for PFAS. And your wastewater treatment plant is one of the bigger problems because, the landfills are sending their leachate there. Everybody has this stuff in their in these various consumer products. They're flushing it down the toilet, and they don't. The processes at the wastewater treatment plant don't take care of PFAS, so they're just discharging it into the river. We had a client who operated a paper mill, and they had their processed water they pulled out of the river, and so their paper sludge ended up having PFAS in it, which got them in trouble. But they weren't using PFAS. They weren't using anything that had PFAS in it. Their raw water had PFAS in it because they were downstream from a wastewater treatment plant, which was discharging PFAS. So they're getting tagged for this contamination, which they had absolutely nothing to do with. But that's the cycle. I mean, you can see how it just goes around and around and around. There was another firm that did a statewide test. They collected rainwater, and they took soil samples from state forests, not near roads, not near any fire sites, anything. This is just pristine wilderness, and they're finding PFAS, and they're finding it above regulatory levels. So even if you've not done anything, I mean, they said we all have PFAS in us, some low level, from our pizza boxes and our popcorn bags and all of that. So I think they said they even found it in polar bear blood. So it's literally everywhere. Just a quick note on long chain, short chain. So in 2000, they started phasing out PFAS and PFOA, and they came up with alternative formulations that they call short chain. So basically, 6 carbons and down is considered a short chain. PFOA and PFAS are 8 carbon. The PFDA, decanoic acid, that's one of the PFAS 6. That has 10 carbons. So there's you can just cleave off one little molecule and it gets a new name and has different properties. So they said, oh, these are better. These are better. It's like, well, they're better, but they're still not good. And you don't want it in your if you've got it in your body. The short chains will leave your body faster, but it still does damage. And so as you keep coming out with different formulations, each one needs a toxicity study. And, these things take years. And meanwhile, these guys are just cranking out different formulations all the time. And then you have EPA chasing them like, oh, that's bad. Okay, well, we'll stop using that. We'll start using this. You don't know anything about this yet. Okay, now let's do all the testing on that. So there is a movement to regulate these compounds as a class. So say all PFAS, you can't have more than whatever the number is that they decide on. EPA has said that there's no safe level of this stuff. The drinking water standards are based more on the limitations of the analytical methods. We can only see down so low. Most of the samples we run, the drinking water samples, we can see down to about 2 parts per trillion, which is very little. But when it's in your drinking water, you think it's a lot. So when we work on these sites, because these things are so ubiquitous, it presents challenges. And usually, you're not just working on a PFAS site. It's a PFAS site with petroleum. It's a PFAS site with PCBs. It's a PFAS site with chlorinated solvents. So when we sample groundwater for chlorinated solvents, for example, we'll use Teflon lined tubing. Well, if you're testing for PFAS, you don't want to use Teflon lined tubing. Some of the sample bottles have a Teflon septum in it. Really peeing hard. So you can't use that. So, the sample bottle has to make sure that's right. Your tubing has to be right. Your pump equipment has to be right. You can't be wearing anything that has Gore-Tex in it. We have these little yellow field books that we use. They're called Write in the Rain. And the sheets are protected so you can write on them while it's raining. Well, those have PFAS on them. So all this stuff has PFAS on it. So if you're going out to do a sampling job for PFAS, you really have to step back. It doesn't just run out with a jar and put the dirt in it. It's, you really got to think it through. What else? Oh yeah, so they always make you do a trip blank. So basically the laboratory takes water, they filter it through carbon, Carbon removes PFAS very well, so that's the one saving grace here. So then we use that water, you send that out with us in the lab, into the field. And so you have a field blank, which is basically you just take, the jar that they gave you full of lab water and you pour that into the other one. And that just tells you, is there anything in the air? Dust has PFAS in it, so if you're in a dusty location, you could conceivably get some PFAS in your sample. This was really overblown at the beginning. We've been doing this for a few years now. We're finding that, the typical procedures we use are fine for this. So we talk about PFAS fate and transport. The solubility of PFOS, how much PFOS can the groundwater absorb? 680 milligrams per liter. So that's ppm. And we're talking ppt. So this is, add 6 zeros to that number, 680 million parts per trillion. It's a lot when you're talking about 20 as your drinking water standard. And you never have just one. You'll never see a sample that's just PFOS or just PFOA. There's always a couple other things in the mix. And because these are so leachable, when you have a situation where AFFF has been applied, nobody cleans it up because you don't know there's anything bad about it. Every time it rains, that stuff goes through, percolates into the groundwater, migrates to the surface water, migrates to a drinking water well. And you have some of these plumes that are just, for petroleum, you think, maybe a half mile. That's a long plume. Chlorinated solvents, maybe a mile or two. PFAS, you can have 5, 6, 7 mile long plumes. So this is in the groundwater from a landfill. It just goes and goes. So we talk about treatment. I mentioned there really wasn't a lot we can do. This stuff is just so stable in the environment, so these things don't break down. So petroleum hydrocarbons are naturally broken down by soil bacteria, water bacteria. Chlorinated solvents under the right conditions will break down biologically. PCBs don't really break down, but PFAS really don't break down. Some compounds will transform into other things, but they don't go away. So dilution is really, there's an old adage, dilution is the solution to pollution. That's really the only thing that applies here. Like I said, carbon works really well for a drinking water application. You'll see, towns that have impacted water supplies, you'll see these houses and, tanks that go like to the ceiling, full of carbon that they pass that through before it goes out. Let's see. Oh, and volatility, that's another thing. So, when we look at doing remediation, we look at, you're digging up the soil and disposing of it. You're pumping air into the water to volatilize contaminants, like gasoline is very volatile, TCE, PCE, some of these chlorinated solvents are very volatile. So they call it air sparging. So you're blowing air into the water, and as these bubbles come up, they take the contaminant with them. And then we can do what they call soil vapor extraction, where you have a series of extraction wells. So basically you pump air into the water, volatilize a contaminant, and then suck it out, pass it through carbon, and then emit it to the air. PFAS don't do that. So you can sparge all you want, you can SVE all you want, but you're just not going to get anything out of it. So that doesn't work. Biological doesn't work. Pumping the groundwater out and treating it that was the way we did everything in the 90s. That doesn't really work either. So while you can treat for a drinking water exposure from a site remediation perspective, you could pump an awful lot of water. One of our projects we have in a town where AFFF was used. I got a couple slides on that coming up, but we added up all the water that we've pumped from all the private wells throughout the town, and I forget the number, 5 or 6 million gallons of water we've pumped, and we got 1 gram of PFAS. So it's just not an efficient way. It's not a good use of limited remediation funds. And I mentioned the commingling. All right. Kind of hit some of that already. But the site characterization is the first bullet up there. You know, as you go around and try to do these things, it's really important to know what is where. And, you know, these soil samples, to analyze a soil sample for PFAS is about $300. The water samples are about $250. So, you know, you can imagine, you know, when you're digging something up to send to an incinerator at $600 a ton, you don't want to dig 1 teaspoon of soil more than you absolutely have to. So you have to try and balance, you know, the number of samples you want to take with, you know, the cost of the remediation. So PFAS forensics is something that kind of an interesting look at this. So I mentioned, you know, there's all these different compounds, there's all these different things that get mixed into the PFAS soup. So I mentioned PFAS made by 3M, PFOA made by DuPont. The way that they're manufactured, if they're electrochemical fluorination, you'll see these are only for sulfonic compounds, so that's the compounds that have the S on them. And you can have even and odd numbered compounds. So the carbons, you know, we talked about PFOA and PFAS have 8, other compounds have 10, some have 7, 5, whatever. The other manufacturing method is called fluorotelomerization. And that can produce either sulfonic or carboxylic compounds, but they're only even numbered. So if you're looking at a plume and you see, you know, 5 carbon, 7 carbon, you'll be like, okay, well, this is not fluorotelomerization. It's okay. And we don't have any PFOA, we only have PFAS. It's like, okay, so, you know, using that kind of analysis, you can tell who manufactured it, and then you can tell, you know, is this from a firefighting foam, you know, by the other compounds that are in the soup. Is it is it from a landfill leachate? Is it from a manufacturing facility? So all those questions can come together, and if you're looking at something that's all mixed up, you know, and you know there was a fire fought over here, okay, well some of that's from you, some of that's from you, some of that's from you, and you all need to pitch in on the remediation. So there's a lot of finger pointing and things like that. Let's see. All right, this is an actual photo from one of our sites that we're working on now. This was a house, a very large house that got struck by lightning, caught fire. Very small town, no town water. The fire department had to go to these ponds, fill their trucks, drive up the hill, put it in the sprayer, they'd spray it on, and you know, there were 22 different fire departments that showed up to help fight this fire. Someone, we don't know who, made the decision, let's just spray the AFFF on it. We're tired of fighting this. We're tired of trucking the water back and forth. It's not safe for people to go in. Let's just spray it with AFFF and put it out. Nobody thought anything of it. This is near the town hall, and the town hall did not have a water permit for their well. So as part of the permitting process, DEP made them sample the well for PFAS. Lo and behold, screaming. They got a lot of PFAS in their water. So we came in completely unaware of the fire in 2019 and start going door to door. DEP made us sample all the houses within a 500-foot radius of the town hall. And as we're doing that, you know, we're talking to people as we're going into their homes, and someone said, is this related to the fire? And we're like, what fire? And so they shared this photo with them. So this is actually during the fire. You can see this is a drain pipe that comes out of the yard, and this is just all foam. This is all foam, water runoff. Of course, it's at the top of the hill, so all this stuff ran off on all the neighbors' properties, percolated into the groundwater. You can see the bedrock right there. I don't know if you've had any geology, but you know, that's a bedrock face right there. So, you know, all the wells in this area are in bedrock. Some of them are 400 feet, 600 feet, 700 feet deep, and a lot of them have PFAS in them. Let's see. Yeah, so we've gone around. Basically, what we had to do is, for every house that we found PFAS, we had to draw a new 500-foot radius, contact all those people, sample all their homes. If they had PFAS, we had to go out another 500 feet. So the ones that we had, the ones that exceeded 20 parts per trillion, we put a they call it POET. It's a point of entry treatment system. It's basically just 2 carbon vessels. They look kind of like a welding gas cylinder, something like that. So you put that in somebody's basement, goes through a sediment filter, goes through the carbon, and then the house is safe to use it. The other thing, before we knew about this, this water was going into their septic system, which goes through the septic tank, into the leach field, right into the ground, right into the groundwater, and gets spread around. Massachusetts has a regulation that your well has to be at least 100 feet away from your septic system, and that was based on typical organic waste, not on PFAS. So this stuff ends up in your septic system, contaminates your neighbor's well, your next neighbor's well, your next neighbor's well. When everybody's doing it, you can imagine the load that comes on. So you're taking this PFAS from deep groundwater, pumping it through your house into your leach field, so now it's shallow. So now you've got a bedrock aquifer as well as an overburden non-bedrock aquifer. You've got PFAS in both now. So that's part of the dynamic of how things move around here. So this is kind of the coolest part, I think, of the whole thing. So this is that town. Our source house is right here is the source property. So the elevation there is quite high. But you can see these so we call these pie charts. So each color represents a different PFAS compound. So the big ones, let's see, we've got. So PFOS is in blue and PFHXS is in gray. So these 2 compounds are indicative of a 3M firefighting foam. So when we see these 2, we think, firefighting foam, 3M, and kind of when these were made, so you can kind of look back, okay, this is, that lines up with when this fire was. But you see this distribution. The predominant groundwater flow direction is kind of down, straight down on this map. But you notice over here, you don't see any gray. There's no gray in any of these houses, but we have all gray over here. So if the firefighting foam signature is PFOS and PFHXS, what's all this? I mean, these are, you can't see, but there's some pretty beefy numbers here. There's some high concentrations. We got a call from one of the guys up here saying that he had bought some topsoil compost from a facility that has since been found to be a major PFAS source. So the thought is that he and maybe some others have bought this material over time, spread it around in their yard, put it in their agricultural fields, and like we talked about, the rain goes through, percolates into the groundwater, gets in the drinking water. Something down here, there's a couple houses down here. One of them had less than 20 parts per trillion, and the next door neighbor had, say, 350 parts per trillion. And we're like, oh my God, that's bizarre. How can there be that much variation? Turns out one of their wells is 600 feet deep and the other one's only 300 feet deep. So you're tapped into different bedrock fractures, which have different concentrations of PFAS in them. There is, we talked about all the stuff that has PFAS in it, so there is kind of a there's a background level of PFAS from everything that people have put into their septic systems. We had houses down here that were testing positive for PFOA and PFOS, but not PFHXS. So we're thinking that the contamination from the fire hadn't gotten there yet. They had that from before. So you have these kind of single digit, 2, 3, 4 parts per trillion, just kind of everywhere. We do have a lot of samples that come back non-detect, but there are a lot of them that have, these kind of low concentrations of different PFAS compounds in them. All right. Oops. Spraying with the laser, sorry. So ongoing challenges we have, as I mentioned, EPA and DEP are trying to play catch up here. These stuff that's been around since the 30s and the 40s. The toxicology is way behind. So, they're trying to regulate something while they're trying to figure it out, which ends up being, you want to be extra conservative and make sure that you are protecting especially vulnerable populations. But there may be some overshoot here. Who knows? 5 to 10 years from now, we may find that, oh, geez, this stuff isn't that bad, or oh, wow, yeah, it's way worse than we thought. But when you're talking to the people that are paying the bills on this stuff, and they're like, well, we don't even know it's all that bad. It's like, I don't make the rules. I just help you stay in compliance with them. And that project that I just talked about, we had farmers saying, is it okay for me to feed my cows the hay that I grew in the field that got applied with the sludge? And I don't know, we're trying to figure out toxicology for humans. I can't tell you what happens to cows. Or, is it okay for my dog to drink this? It's like, your dog probably only lives 10 years, probably. But, we can't say any of that because we have no idea. Studies haven't been done. Everything's going to be focused on humans, obviously, and people with compromised immune systems, children, things like that. So that's where the bulk of that goes. But you have all these questions that come up that I just don't know. You got PFAS contamination below an apple orchard. Are the apples safe? I don't know. They've been spraying arsenic pesticides all over the apple trees for years. That's another thing that comes up. But so people come up with these questions and they get very frustrated when I don't have the answers, and there just are no answers. I'm sorry. But you can see the economic implication for the farmer. I got all these cows that I paid thousands of dollars for that I could sell for thousands more, but I can't guarantee that they don't have PFAS in them. And to butcher them, test the meat to find out they have PFAS, and now it's waste. So we have things like that. There's just so many different veins of this stuff to chase. The remediation, like we talked about. Digging up the soil and putting it on a train and sending it out to Idaho for incineration. The carbon fluorine bond we talked about is so strong. You have to cook the soil to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Trash burners are not at that temperature. That takes a very, what they call like a cement kiln. It's like a big tube that rotates and it's extremely hot. So that's really the only way to truly destroy it. Digging it up and putting it in a landfill, you're just relocating the PFAS problem to the landfill. Now it's the landfill's problem. The landfill probably already has a problem, but making that worse is not the best idea. So, we really wrestle with, does it make sense to spend $5 million to dig up that guy's entire yard with the PFAS? And well, why stop there? Let's do the neighbors too, because he's got it too, and the next neighbor down's got it too. So now it's a $10 million cleanup project. We can put a lot of POET systems on people's wells and protect them while the science catches up. So, people get frustrated. I have public meetings with these people all the time, and they just yell at me, why aren't we doing anything? Why aren't we doing anything? It's like, I'm not going to put a little Band-Aid on this for you. I'm not going to say spend $5 million on this. A POET system is $3,000. You got to sample it every 6 months. At a cost of maybe $1,000, $5 million goes a long way when you're talking about this, and you're talking about a small town with a municipal budget. So the do-nothing approach is kind of where we're at. There's a lot of very smart people working on this. As you can imagine, if you can unlock this, if you can pick this lock, you're going to have a multi-billion-dollar idea. So there's a lot of colleges, a lot of academics that are working on this. Trying to find, I think the best thing is going to be a biological approach. If they can engineer a bacteria that can break that carbon fluorine bond, that will probably be the ticket. You can apply that, you can inject that into the groundwater, get the bugs to do the dirty work. And we're talking about parts per trillion. So this isn't from a mass standpoint, this isn't a heavy load. So bacteria, we've used bacteria to degrade TCE, tetrachloroethene, trichloroethene, and it does a pretty good job on thousands of parts per billion levels. So PPT should be a cakewalk if you can find the right bug. So that's kind of where the research is focused at the moment. And the other thing is we haven't shut off the spigot. There's still PFAS. They stopped making some of it here, but they're still making the some of the replacement chemicals, some of the shorter chain stuff. In Asia, China, they're still making PFAS, and some of that stuff finds its way back here in things that are imported from those countries. So yeah, if we can't stop what's coming in, it's kind of crazy that we're still feeding the monster. This PFAS is still being used, still being released, still being put into septic systems, after all we know about it. So, which leads to what we did on the interagency task force. So this started in early 2021. It was right in the peak of COVID. So while I was home working remotely on my computer, we were having hearings. So there were 11 different hearings. I won't jump ahead. So this is the cover of the report. If you go on if you just Google PFAS Interagency Task Force, it'll come up. And there's recordings of everybody that testified, including me. But we had, academics, we had people from the fire departments, we had people from, it was, like an airport manager who was dealing with this, toxicologists, people from Mass DEP, obviously talking about how they're regulating this. So we had a guy, Rob Balot, I mentioned the Devil We Know movie. Rob Balot was the attorney. He worked at a big law firm that actually was doing work for DuPont. And a friend of his grandmother's was having a problem. And so he drove down from Cincinnati to Parkersburg, met with this guy, walked his farm, and he's just got dead cows everywhere. And their teeth are just black. And it all started right when DuPont built a landfill next to his farm. He sold them a piece of property. They said they wouldn't put anything bad in it. And you could see the water coming from that landfill in the stream that goes by his farm, where his cows drank from, had foam in it. So they were just discharging the stuff. It was leaking out of whatever they were dumping. It got into people's water. It was pretty egregious. I mean, if you watch the movie and you aren't angry, I'd be surprised. So that was Rob Balot. In the movie Dark Waters, Mark Ruffalo plays him. I thought he did a pretty good job, but I kind of prefer the documentary version. It's a little bit more hard-hitting, I think. So at the end of our task force service, we produced a report, and in that report, we talked about banning PFAS from projects or from products, consumer products. That the state needs to establish a remediation fund. There is a massive lawsuit going on right now against 3M and DuPont called the MDL, the multi-district litigation. All the cases are being run through South Carolina. Most of our clients have joined that lawsuit, the idea being that you're going to recoup some money. Don't hold my breath. Hopefully they get enough to treat this problem, but I'm not confident that they are. I did ask Rob Balot when he testified whether he thought that these companies had the financial wherewithal to clean this up. And he said absolutely. He said, these companies sell trillions of dollars worth of stuff every year. They can take a little bit out and clean up their mess. So encouraging private well testing was something else. Usually when you buy a house that has a well, the town will make you do some basic water quality testing. They want to add PFAS to that. So your water analysis bill goes from $100 to $500. But if it's there, you certainly want to know before you buy the house. And it's just finding out who's doing this stuff. Who's doing this stuff, and they should need to pay for it. And increasing public awareness. I mean, before this, how many of you had heard of PFAS? Very few. Yeah. So there's a public awareness component to this. Because a lot of people just don't know. You say PFAS, and they go, what? And it's like, God, this is my bread and butter. This is what I do every day. So yeah, that's part of it. I have here, these are just some basic resources. So Mass DEP has a lot of great information. EPA has good information. The ITRC is kind of I view them as kind of the gold standard. They don't have to go through all the vetting that EPA has to before they can publish anything. But they have, sampling guides, basically everything I talked about, they have something on. So they're right on top of it. They update things constantly. If you're ever involved in a PFAS issue, I recommend you check out the ITRC. And then for our task force is there too. So like I said, you can get the report, everybody that testified, and then I think they have a link to the legislation that's been proposed, to get the PFAS out of our consumer products. And then Watch the Devil We Know. I've watched it multiple times. My poor wife has had to sit through it multiple times. But each time I watch it, I pick up something new from it. So and that was all I had. If anybody has any questions, happy to try to answer. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask about the outcome of remediation methods in Westfield and, the relationship with Barnes Military Air Base.
We do a fair amount of work for the city. I think we're building we're building one of the treatment plants to treat water from 2 of the impacted wells. I haven't really been involved in litigation. I know they're part of the MDL. They are suing DuPont and 3M. We do work at the Westfield Airport too, and I tried to poke my nose in hey, what's going on with the PFAS? And can't talk about it. It's ongoing legal mumbo jumbo. So at the moment, I'm not aware that they've done any remediation whatsoever. Like I said, you can imagine the size of that property and how much soil they'd have to dig up to make a meaningful difference, and it's just not financially feasible. So, I think they're taking kind of the same tact in treating the affected groundwater, drinking water for people, so that at least we're not being exposed to it while they hammer out who's going to pay, what they're going to do, how they're going to pay for it. But that is, if it's in, if it's in the mother's body, she does pass that to the infant when they nurse. It is in the milk, so it is. It's definitely in there.
In the next town over in Williamstown, they're building a new fire station, and the fire chief has been very determined to bring a training center to that facility as they're building it. It is being built in a 500-year floodplain. They have put fill in. Are there foams and materials they can use for training that don't contain PFAS that are safe for that situation?
Yeah, there's one in central Massachusetts. The town escapes me at the moment. Oh, Stowe. There's one in Stowe. And they were putting out to bid, someone to come in and do the LSP remediation or assessment, not really remediation yet. So I went on that site walk, and they had discontinued the use of AFFF, and they were using, I think, just Dawn. They were just putting Dawn in the nozzles, and it sprays and makes foam, and so it's close enough for training purposes. But they have developed, instead of AFFF, it's just FFF, fluorine-free foam. So it's made with, obviously not fluorine, but from, they're trying to get that out right now. I mean, there's problems with federal regulations require that fire stations have AFFF. They haven't modified that. On the task force, we had a widow of a firefighter who had died of cancer, and she was adamant that it had come from their turnout gear. So the turnout gear they wear is treated with this stuff so it doesn't catch on fire, which is great, but the PFAS part's not so great. So, again, that's like a regulation that has to change, and trying to get this through, local Congress, federal, to change these standards to allow these, fluorine-free foams and not AFFF or not fluorine-treated turnout gear for firefighters. And that was something else too, is that, when the firefighters would wash their gear, the wash water has PFAS in it. So if that's going to a septic system, you're spreading the problem. So yeah, getting these chemicals out of our products is got to be like priority number. Well, drinking water's first, I guess, but just turn off the spigot and stop putting more of this stuff in the environment.
There's no state regulation either. You said no federal, but no state either to about the training, about what they're using when they're training? Do you know?
I don't think the regulation has changed. I think they just realized, geez, we got to do something else.
Okay.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could speak to some of the differences between these long chain and short chain compounds. Are they used for different purposes? Have they been changing over time? Or, yeah.
So like I mentioned, PFOA and PFAS are the eight carbons. They've gone, so there's kind of an intermediate where they were using, I want to say PFHXS and PFBS maybe, which is a 4 carbon. The shorter chains leave your body quicker than the longer chains. Since they've stopped making that, now they realized, going down a couple carbons isn't buying you much. So now they use what are called fluorotolymer sulfates. You'll see like 6,2-FTS, 8,2-FTS, and those are what they call precursors. So they behave like PFAS, so you get the same kind of effect in your product. But when those are discharged to the environment, they don't degrade, but they will change. So that might lead to, through some steps to creating PFOA or something like that. So while they've stopped making it, you still have these other compounds that can create these compounds naturally in the environment. But firefighting foam is the only thing I can think of off the top of my head that's really gone through kind of that. So we're on like a 3rd generation now with the fluorotolymer sulfates, but the fluoride-free foams should take those over at some point. Yes?
I have a question about the task force. Do you think that it was it effective?
I think so. It really brought, because I think a lot of our local Congress people are just, regular people that, they're not necessarily up on everything. So I think it opened a lot of eyes. And, while if it was in your town, like say Westfield, we're aware of this, but not really aware of maybe the rest of it. So, just the knowledge that it's in so many products, that it's still being imported. So I think that really kind of opened people's eyes to it. And there is, I don't know, a dozen or so laws that are coming out now that are being proposed, to get this stuff out of our supply chain. So from that purpose, from that aspect, yeah, I hope it did. I hate to think I've wasted all that time for nothing. But if you read through the report, I think it's, it talks about the various legislation that the goals of what legislation could be. And I think a lot of that has been proposed. Yes?
Along the lines of legislation, I like the idea of regulating PFAS as a class, but I'm sensitive to, the regulations for drinking water standards are based on what analytical techniques are available. What sort of analytical techniques might be used for PFAS as a class?
Yeah, that's why I've kind of just been baffled by how you could possibly regulate that. I mean, if you even see, if you look at the standards that they have now for the few compounds that they are regulating, they vary quite a bit. So, I think you're going to end up grossly over-regulating some things, and I can't imagine anyone's going to under-regulate this going forward, but yeah, and I think we're going to see probably some changes in the analytical methods too. I mean, right now they're using gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, to get down to like a 2 part per trillion. EPA had set a goal, not a standard, but a goal of 0.04 parts per trillion. There's no laboratory in the world that can see down that far. So, I think that's going to be the limitation. I mean, you can't, but then you run into the background too. So, if you have low concentrations in soil almost everywhere and you have it in rainwater, I mean, what do you do? It's just a conundrum that I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch how it shakes out. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come out here, and thanks for coming.